We're setting up to do some alcove shelves here. It's our standard sort of work. We do a lot of these, but these particular ones are in oak, which always look very nice when they're done. So we've got our components, which consist of pre-lipped parts. So you've got your solid oak lipping on veneered MDF, and then the bases, which encase the shelf around the battens on the wall, which are just unlipped. But these are all pre-finished. We've sprayed these with 2 coats of water-based varnish. We actually used varnish from Finney's, Mark Finney, who was our old finishing supplier. It's good stuff. We're phasing out into moving to Movac now, but this has done the job perfectly well here. A bit of a wet day, so we've sheeted out thoroughly with sticky stuff to the doorway. And my next step now will be to mark the heights for the battens, which I will do based on this drawing. I've just put the tape measure there because I'm trying to be a bit more discreet than I used to be about showing customer names. But if you saw there, we got the heights. We've got heights marked, which are to the battens that are encased within the structure. So we make sure that we've got the notes of the heights where the battens should be, and then we build out over them. I've got this laser level, which is a fairly cheap one. It doesn't have the magnet on the back. It's actually made to fit on a pole, but I don't really ever use that. I just put it on a flat surface. I don't know if that line shows up. Yeah, I think it does show up in the video. What I usually do is I'll drop my tape measure from there to the floor, and I'll do the same over there. I'll make a note of any disparity, and I'll do the maths so that my running heights are adjusted accordingly. I find that quicker than trying to set the laser level up to the actual height of the shelves. I just use it as a reference to adjust the measurements. So we've got our lower shelf battens on in both alcoves, and I've leveled off, like I said, with the laser level. I've made a classic error, which is where my first line I accounted for the difference in level the wrong way around. I added on instead of taking off, or vice versa, but I caught myself and fixed it. You can see on this one, Jonathan's fitted these modesty blocks, so they're just these simple plastic fixings which you can screw through in 2 directions. You want to use 4 gauge by 25mm screws for them. So that's a relatively recent method where we use them to hold the lower panel, which I'll show you in a minute. So that's glued to the battens, it's held on, so you don't have to through fix it. And then the upper panel goes on top of that, it's glued on, and the front lip is clamped, and then the glue does most of the work. So the way I then fix the panels is this is our base one here. I first cut it roughly to length but slightly oversized, and then my method, there's different methods, but my method is I would offer it up tight to the wall, so I know that it's squared to the wall, and then tight, just come around here and have a look at this batten here, tight to the batten there, and I can then find the contour shape here, which may be out of square, so I would just scribe with a pencil along there to get that right. So I've done that back and forth like 3 or 4 times, both ends, to the point where that is now fitting with the right shape at the ends, and it's just the right tightness. There's not a lot of the gap there. So that's partly trial and error, and just judgment and experience, how I get that in. What I then want to do is use that as a template. I'll use it for the upper bit, which I'm about to show you, but I also just want to see if that approximately fits for the next 2. And just doing this shows me that the alcove gets narrower at the top, so that is a bit too big. So what I can do is use that as a template for the next bits, knowing that they'll be close but slightly oversized, but I would have saved myself a bit of cutting just by templating straight off that. So for the upper part of that bottom shelf, I now want to offer this on. And here's another place where mistakes are quite easy, because you've got to think about spinning stuff around and what goes where. So I know that this, when it's assembled, is going to go like that to make up that shelf. So when I'm templating the shape onto that, I want to keep them in the same orientation, which means that's going to go on top for me to draw around. Now the way we size these in the workshop is we make them 20mm longer than the measured maximum alcove width. So you can see I've got about 10mm to take off each end, which is right. And that just covers any any eventualities. Now, because we've got this quite polished finish, it's quite hard to mark onto, so I'll just use masking tape. Do that around the front. And then it's simply a case of offering that up, making sure it's flush along the back, and on both ends, pencil, on both ends just scribing that off. And then I'll know that if I cut so that that line disappears, so I'll cut to the near edge of that line, then that should perfectly fit, because this one already does in the alcove. So once you've done your first piece, you can mostly template off it to the others. I've noticed that on the alcove over here, the wall really undulates quite a lot at the back, so I will have to scribe the back of that. But if I can avoid that, I do, because even a slight, maybe up to, well, I don't know, up to maybe about a 4mm gap, I'll probably just leave at the back, because typically your plaster goes along and then kicks in a bit there. You just have to judge it really. But particularly when it's oak and you're leaving a tiny shadow gap, because it would be a mess to cork it. Often at the back you don't really see if it's not a perfect fit. So I'll crack on with this. We're doing this in reverse order because our normal method would be get all the battens on first and then start from the top. And I've put my unlipped panel at the top out of sight, so if I make any cock-ups there, it's less visible, and then you get better as you go down. We're doing this the opposite because we can't put all the battens on yet, because each shelf has a divider between it. So I want to get the shelf on, offer the divider up, use that as a reference for the level of the next shelf, rather than risk just fitting them all and then there's gaps with the dividers, because everything's, the dividers are pre-cut exactly to length, because that just seemed easier to not have to cut them on site. So I'll drop in a few photos of the rest of the process and speak to you later. Well, I'm pleased with this fit. It's about as good as I could hope to get it. Tight both ends to the lip. I should say though, that's my second attempt, because I cut this board and I wasn't happy with the gap. But because I knew that the upper space gets narrower, I knew that I could use that later and it would be tight. So I decided to recut this from what would have been the second shelf and just get my tolerances a bit tighter. It's very hard to get in, and I have actually back cut, so the gap's a bit more there to help me get it in, but I've left the lip. These will be full of vinyl records in the end, so the lip is the most visible thing. So we're using our favourite Uno plugs, 6mm drilled hole, the red Uno plugs. We prefer them because they grab into solid wall and plasterboard very well. We have a colour code system for our screws, where anything that's made to go in the wall is a gold screw, and anything that's made to go into wood is a silver screw. It's just something that we've adopted. So we have a couple of screws that are quite similar in size, but just slightly different for a different purpose. So if you know that it's silver and it goes in a carcass, it just saves confusion. Okay, so this one I know is very tight and it might need a good shove in. It's very hard to get these fitting tight without a little bit of damage to the walls, which is something that I always warn customers about. Now with these 25mm screws, we'll drive down into the modesty box. These ones up.
Yeah.
So what we'll be doing up there out of sight is just getting a screw down in each of them, and just one screw is enough because that pulls it tight, so that the glue will then set nice and tight. I'll carry on doing that all the way around. Then the top, which is one of these, the top will go in and on tight with glue just the same. And then we'll get the clamps here because that's the place where a slight bit of sag could just open up a gap. The clamps will get that glue setting and then we'll have a nice rigid shelf. This one we're doing the opposite way to the first one I showed you, the upper one, because it's below eye level. You've got the unlit part on the bottom, so just to avoid glue dripping, we always glue the bottom piece. So you just offer it up underneath the battens. And you can see now how the screws go in through the modesty box. You can see the board has a bit of a curve. There's more of a gap at the ends. That just happens in the workshop when it gets sprayed on one side. It sets up a bit of an imbalance in the board. But that's pulled out when it's assembled. See, that just pulls tight there. So it's not really anything to worry about. Check that joint is tight and get our clamps on. What Jonathan's been working on here is scribing this mantelpiece. It's a hollow boxed up section that we made that sits over a sort of comb shaped thing that's fixed to the wall. So yeah, hollow inside, and that allows us then to more easily scribe because it's just a thin box. You can see that there's a big curve to the wall there, so we're scribing all the way around. We'll rail saw that, probably hand cut that end grain oak at the bottom there and plane it to fit. Now that we've got the shelves up in that left hand alcove, we can work on the base cabinet which is going underneath it. It's got an angled shape to it, so it comes from the chimney breast out. So the TV that will sit on it is inclined towards the room. So Jonathan's just getting that set up. That's been made in the workshop according to the Sketchup drawings. We've we've used our standard inset style hinges. I'll show you them close up later. And the way we mount them angled is we just have a post that the hinge goes on, which is kicked to perpendicular to the front face, rather than messing around with angled mounting plates and stuff. So to go on top of that, we've got an angled oak countertop, which has all been made from 23mm oak board, solid oak board, which we buy from Optimum Timber Supplies in Mexborough. So these scribes on angled units, they are a little bit more difficult because you're meeting the edge at an angle. So if, say, I was to measure off here, that would be different to where the front face of the piece meets. So I need to make sure that I'm measuring off the face line of the piece. And then as this kicks out, again, that's kind of further forward, just because of the geometry of it. So I've measured off, I've cut it, I've gone back and forth a couple of times. I've done a mixture of just measuring the gap and taking off the door gap, going in with this scribing tool and offering it up and then readjusting it. I have slightly, not back cut, the opposite of back cut really, just to make sure that there's material fairly tight against the wall, given the angle, so that there's something for the cork filler to sit in. Because if I'd just done that at a right angle, you'd have it touching near the front, and then the cork would just disappear at the back, so it wouldn't really hold in very well. You can think you've got this wrong when you're trying to get it in, again because of the geometry tightening towards the front, but in fact this does fit well. If anything, I've maybe slightly overcut it, but allowing for about a 2mm cork gap, I've got my roughly 3mm door gap there, so I'll cork all that, and then that will come up looking really smart. We're fitting these shelves and a mantle in the bedroom as well, and these shelves are 1.7 meters long, which is pretty big for this kind of floating shelf. So we're putting a divider similar to downstairs. We're putting a central divider in there. And the other thing that we're doing to be really confident of the supportiveness, the strength of it, is we chose to use birch ply for the battens. We're putting extra screws in. I'm actually putting two screws in the end batten, which I don't always do. I'm going to drill an extra one here. And the spacer piece again is birch ply as opposed to MDF. And it's one continuous piece. Sometimes we just pack in separate bits of scrap just really as a spacer. I thought, well, let's keep a continuous piece of quite strong material. And then of course we've got the solid oak lip, so it's really acting as quite a strong built-up beam at the front there. Then with the divider as well, it's going to be a very strong shelf. So here it is all finished. This is the product of 2 days work, not long days, perfectly normal days. That's including the bedroom upstairs. I've just tallied up, there's I think 41 different scribed edges, 41 edges. Oh no, I forgot about the mantle upstairs actually. That'd be 43 different board edges that meet the wall and had to be individually scribed to the shape of the wall. So a project like this, it is very demanding and time consuming, and each of those scribes has to be as precise as you can make it. 45, because I'm forgetting, just done Italian, I was forgetting these white scribes as well. So the point is, a lot of scribing, a lot of work, and this can be more work than, say, if we just had a bookcase that just has 2 cover scribes on it. And as I think I've said before, this kind of work can be a lot harder to make a profit in, because there's that much work, but there's not necessarily the same perceived value as, say, a kitchen, which in fact could be a run of units with very few scribes. It might just be a scribe each end where it meets the wall. So anyway, leaving that to one side, the result is, I think, very good. The customer is extremely pleased, to the point of being almost a little emotional, which is always nice. I think they've just got exactly what they hoped for, perhaps even better than they expected in terms of the fit and the finish. So altogether, a very successful job, and I hope it's been an interesting set of insights for you if you're another fitter. I've taken my time on this just to show the whole process, and I hope if you're someone that's thinking about getting this work done, then it's been an insight as well into how much is involved in doing this really well in terms of time, skill, tools and experience. I do get a few customers that say they start off planning to do it themselves and then really look into what's involved and decide to get a professional in. So if you're in that category, then do consider giving us a call at Freebird. My name's Alistair Johnson. I still do the design and, as you've seen, the installation to what I hope you'll agree is a very good standard. So thanks again, and bye for now.